Hey, Brown is here, so what the heck? Now the Brown's here, it's all right.
Well, he's outside. Does that mean you're still waterlogged inside?
Not as of about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon.
That took a while, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't, it gives a whole new meaning to Labor Day weekend. That's all I can say.
No kidding.
Yeah, we basically had, in reality, 6 days where we basically went from 11 to 13 hours of cleaning each day.
Oh my goodness. What,
Yeah,
do you have flooding? Is that what it is?
Yeah, but it was worse, Chip, because it was when the river crested and major flood stage is considered 10 feet and it went to 14.4. When that happened, it overwhelmed the sewer system, and so
Everything backed up.
Yeah, we were doing fine until we hit it filled the slop sinks down in the cellar, and it was literally cascading over like a waterfall. So we ended up with about 18 inches of sewage in our basement.
Oof.
Yeah, that was the ugly part. The
I
only
would,
good news is we never lost power, so we didn't lose the sump pumps.
yeah. That'd be about time to move to the top of the mountain.
Like I said,
Says a man who
we
lives
hit
at
it
the
at
top of the mountain.
99. We got a hit in 2011, and again we were fine. Until the river flowed over, backed up the sewer system, we were fine. All around us, which was just scary. We actually made ABC national news because they brought helicopters in over my house, and they talk about Springfield Avenue and Nomahegan Park. Nomahegan Park is literally across the street from me and down one block. I will put it in the chat just so you guys can watch it at your leisure, but it's pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I don't know how I follow that.
With a roll of paper towels is probably the right answer.
Yeah, or a lot of toilet paper. I'm not sure which one.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so today we're going to talk about emotional intelligence and the emotional quotient. And since we've got a small group, I just want to start off by asking, what do you want to know? Because I'll be more than happy to go through the tool. I've got mine that I can walk you through the tool and walk you through what is it. I can talk about emotional intelligence and what stands behind the EQ, how it was developed, that kind of thing. But I want to know what you want to know.
Chip, for me, I'll just hop in just with one. What I'm really interested in is when you've debriefed this with people, where, if at all, do wheels fall off the truck? Because I mean, I've done a lot of debrief of regular disc and values and all this kind of stuff. I haven't done that many EQ debriefs yet. But I don't know if it's like if there's a particular section or a particular group of questions that, man, it's like, yeah, if you're going to get pushback, or if people are really going to go, tell me more about this, what you've actually experienced since you've been using the tool for so many years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, a lot of it is the way you explain it too, but I get it. Mike, you said you were about to say something.
Yeah, so if you hang around the Hartman Institute people, they'll tell you that the Hartman value profile is much deeper than emotional quotient. And some of them will anyway. So the question is, what's the relationship? Can you use one to strengthen the other? Would you ever do them both together, or, use the results of EQ to then go into individual coaching on the Hartman value profile, those kind of things.
Sure. Okay, good. That's a great question. Nancy, you have anything?
Okay, there I am. Actually, what I've been thinking about lately in terms of using the EQ assessment and tying it into a strategy for developing and implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion processes within an organization. I think they go hand in hand. But I'm thinking the more I read, I think a component of that that's missing, and I'm not quite sure how to tie in. It's not only being aware of your own emotions or being aware of other people's emotions, it's helping people accept themselves. We don't need other people to validate us. And yet that's what I see going on in the world. People demand that you accept them for whatever they are. And my gut tells me they're not even accepting themselves. So I want to see how emotional intelligence could drive the self-acceptance.
Okay, Tom.
So I've used this tool probably not as long as you, but as longer than the others. And I think what I'd like to take away is if I can just get 3% better at debriefing it, or 5% better by just hearing things from you, I'll be happy with this.
Okay.
But let me also share my journey with this tool. I first took it, and as I took the survey, unlike the other, the trimetrics survey questions, I felt that I could make myself look better than I otherwise, if I wasn't candid with this is why I would challenge using this in the selection process. I think it's great for coaching after we've gone through trimetrics, but my sense was I could game this one if I wanted to. Now, maybe because I know more about surveys, whatever, but I'd sense that. And so I didn't think it was that valid. Then I let go of the part that might not be so valid. And I embraced the part that this is a tool. It enables us to have a discussion about self-awareness and self-regulation. I don't care if it's accurate or not. If it's accurate, and I scored pretty low, surprisingly low for what I thought I would do, but I took it candidly, right? So I just thought I'd share that. I let go of the need for this for me to believe that this was a really accurate tool, and just use it as a tool, because that's what it is. It's a tool for having some robust discussions about when do your emotions get the better of you, and what triggers that.
Okay, so I'll start with Tom first, because and it adds into what Mike wanted to talk about as well, which is I can always tell. See, I use it for selection. I use trimetrics and I use EQ for selection, because I really want to know what the emotional makeup of the executive that I'm want to hire, that the person wants to hire. So I want to have an understanding of how they see themselves, because remember, these assessments are how they see themselves. And the EQ, what I've come to know over time, is that the EQ, yeah, people game it, but it shows up in unrealistic results. So if it is if it shows the next coming, that this person is all things to all people, if the EQs are in the top 16% all the way down the 5 different factors, they're gaming it. So that tells me a couple things. First of all, that tells me that they have an overexpanded view of themselves, or they didn't feel comfortable enough to answer the assessment correctly. And then in the trimetrics, in the Hartman, well, actually the DNA, what you're going to find is usually out of the 25 factors in the DNA, 10 of them are going to be ranked at 100. So between the EQ and the DNA, I've had a lot of candidates kicked out because they're going in and they're gaming the test. And the people that are hiring them don't want to see that. They don't want to hire that. And so that's the way that I usually see it. And if I see it in a coaching client, or if I see it in, I use trimetrics EQ, which is combination of DISC driving forces and EQ in a lot of the seminars that are run, the team building seminars and that kind of thing. when I see that in those, I see somebody who is stretching to be something that they're not. And you're right, Tom, that's the conversation. The Hartman versus the EQ, I think they measure completely different things. So the Hartman is how I understand other people and how I understand myself. It is not necessarily correlative that somebody has a low sense of self also has a low self-awareness and self-regulation, because they're measuring different things. And so, you know, I mean, you're right. The Hartman people, especially if you get into somebody that does not use the TTI Hartman tool, because the Hartman tool, if you understand the Hartman tool, it actually measures 27 different things. The reason that TTI keeps it to 6 is because they want it to be an industrial tool, not a clinical tool. And in fact, if you go back to one of the former people who was Jay Niblick, who brought the ACI to TTI, there were some comments in the Hartman that if someone scores below 4 on the or 40 on sense of self, that they're a danger to themselves and others. Well, I don't know that you can really say that. First of all, I don't want to get sued over it, and second of all, I don't really think you can say that, because the TTI instrument floors it at 40. So maybe in some of those other cases, maybe in some of those other 21 factors that it measures, it can be clinical and it can get into deeper areas. But the ones that TTI specifically uses are strictly industrial tools. And so, you know, it's how do I see the way that I deal with work process versus how do I see my roles, which, you know, this is kind of off the subject for today, but role awareness, I think, is really rich, because especially if you see a vast undervaluation, it's someone that is disconnected from the roles and is at risk for fleeing. You know, so if you want to find somebody that is just about to leave a job, you can usually see that in a undervalued. Yeah, Doug.
So if we were to do the population in general today, with the number of people that are just quitting jobs even before they have another one to go to, you know, when you think about the Great Resignation,
Mm-hmm.
would you expect that role awareness be at almost at an all-time low right now?
Role awareness could be high in the score, but undervalued. So there could be, you know, if someone identifies as an engineer, their role awareness is going to be really high. You know, I identify as a coach, you identify as whatever you identify as, but if you identify really strongly with the roles and you have a great home life and you know, you love your kids and all that kind of stuff, your role awareness is probably going to be pretty strong. But the undervaluation in the role awareness is where you tick whether you're more engaged or where you're less engaged. Now, I don't know if it's correlative, because I don't know how it would correlate with a Gallup 12 or some of the other instruments that are out there to measure engagement. But I've noticed that you know, usually if they're 100% undervalued, that's a person that may be toxic in their position and may be spewing all kinds of venom throughout the organization. Or they've had a body blow. Like I had a recent situation where a client of mine had a really bad situation at work, and it was keeping her from fully engaging. And so that, you know, we see that in role awareness. So anyway, so that's the Hartman versus the EQ. So let me just because TTI turned me into a graph reader several years ago, let me just go to the graph. And this is the graph that this is the major graph. So what you're looking at is the top three are the internals or the self. So self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, and then the bottom are social awareness and social regulation. Those are more about others. So top three are about self, bottom two are about others. To give you to answer Doug's question, I get the biggest kickback on motivation, and it's all in the way you describe it. So somebody looks at it and say their motivation is like 30, and they go, wait a second, I'm really motivated. I'm vice president of something. I'm motivated. So this level of motivation is about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. If you're extrinsically motivated, the motivation will show up as much lower. If you're intrinsically motivated, then it's going to be much higher. And here's the story I tell about this. You probably read Grit by Angela Duckworth. She's pretty brilliant. She worked with Danny Kahneman and a number of other people. In fact, Kahneman was her sponsor for her PhD at Pitt. And she in Grit, she tells the story of the three bricklayers. Well, there's a lot of three bricklayer stories around. I've seen a number of them, but I liked her take on it. And her take about the three bricklayers. Three bricklayers are asked what they're doing, and the first one says, I'm laying bricks, and the second one says, I'm building a church, and the third one says, I'm building a cathedral to glorify God. And her take on it is that the first one has a job, the second one has a career, and the third one has a calling. What I see in this motivation graph is if you're low, you probably have a job. And a job is defined by you're going to work for the money, you're going to work for the, as it says, for knowledge, utility, surroundings, others, power, or methodology. So you've got extrinsic motivators. And the reason that you're getting up every day and going is to pay the bills. And you may or may not like what you're doing, but it's not your driving passion. And then when you get more towards the middle, so the way you read this, like a lot of the TTI instruments, the 77 is the national mean on motivation. The wings on either side are 68% of the population, a standard deviation of the mean, middle of the bell curve. And so if you fall more towards the middle of the bell curve, you're probably more in a career mode. So what is a career? Well, a career is you're attached to what you do. You enjoy what you do, but someday you're going to retire. And if you never go back to it again, so what? You're going to go off and play tennis or golf or help your husband around the home. If that's your plan for retirement, that probably isn't a good plan. But when I see it getting towards the top of the mean or into the top 16% of the population, then I see it more as a calling. And I just relate to myself. I love what I do. I mean, everybody on this call loves what they do. And it doesn't even occur to us to retire. I'm still trying to figure out that term of cutting back. I haven't figured out how to do, because somebody calls you and says, do you, and you say yes, and then you're off to the races for another one. But that's where the motivation shows. So Doug, to answer your question, I get the biggest pushback in motivation. The second area that I get, I don't really get social awareness and social regulation. I don't usually get a pushback there. I do get a little bit of pushback in self-awareness and self-regulation. And, let me go a little bit deeper into self-awareness versus self-regulation. And Nancy, this is going to answer your question as well, because I see both of them playing together. So self-awareness is the ability to understand your needs, your motivations, your emotions. It's understanding where you are, who you are, and your effect on other people. Okay, so when I see somebody with really low self-awareness, I just kind of like, do the sign of the cross and say, get out of here. Because it's going to be a really difficult conversation that, it's a person who, and usually they say, well, I thought I had really good self-awareness. I'm really self-aware of myself. Yeah, no, you're not. But the more important one to me, so I look for self-awareness in executives, because that is going to tell me if they are a good steward of their own emotional health. Self-regulation is your ability to throttle back. It's your ability to put the control rod in when you're about to go postal. It's your ability to calm yourself down. And I have one client. He's when I first started working with him, he was a division leader for a company. He became group president of one of the groups, and 3 years ago he became COO. If I look at the difference between his first assessments when we started working together 9 years ago, and now, 9 years ago, his self-regulation was horrible. He's a high D. Oh yeah, he's a high D, high resourceful, and high commanding. Okay, so it's all about getting the job done, and get the hell out of my way. His self-regulation was below, it was in the bottom 16% of the population. It's now in the top 16% of the population. And the difference in the way that he is seen by the organization, he isn't seen as a D. He's seen as nobody can remember a time in his current position where he is blown up. Even if there's bad news, even if somebody lost a bunch of money on a project, nobody can remember a time where he blew up. Nobody can remember a time where he got overly excited or heated or even talk stridently to anybody. And that's the big difference is the self-regulation. Now, I'm really fascinated by what the brain can do, because having a stroke 9 years ago, it got me really fascinated about understanding the brain and understanding the brain processes. And I can go into that if you'd like me to, but just the understanding of the physical and mechanical processes that go into our ability to be self-aware and self-regulate are pretty fascinating. And there's a lot of talk about all the different biases. I think they've come up with 283 different biases that we have. And we have biases about everything. Confirmation bias is probably the most popular one, but there's all kinds. I get lost in all the different biases. I mean, we as humans are kind of screwed up, So
I will say that whole Kahneman stuff, decisions fast and slow, is just absolutely fast. I mean, it took me a long time to make it all the way through.
yeah,
But it was like every time I thought I knew something, it's like, nope, you just got caught again. That was a very humbling book to read.
yeah. Well, usually when you read a Nobel laureate, it usually gets that way. It's like Nudge. Thaler is the author of the progenitor of Nudge. Even though he wrote it with Cass Sunstein, it's pretty fascinating. I think Thaler wrote it more humanly, because Thaler has a really wicked sense of humor. But anyway, all right. what have I missed? I think I've gotten everybody. Nancy, did I answer you, or did I specifically answer you?
No, that's a help, especially focusing on the self-regulation piece of it, because I keep seeing stories of people, you see it on Facebook all the time, and these people who literally explode because they were, quote, misgendered. Someone called them by the wrong pronoun, and that then gives them, they are entitled then to blow up. And I really think there's some tie here with emotional intelligence, because somewhere along the line, we've not given people the opportunity to make mistakes. I mean, if somebody accidentally says the wrong thing, does not give you permission to rain terror on them. So I think the self-regulation piece has got to be a component of it.
Well, and so much of the discussion of EQ is about triggers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So self-awareness is understanding what triggers you.
Mm-hmm.
Self-regulation is then being able to control your reaction to being triggered.
I guess the important part of that is, do they choose to want to control themselves? Again, you see it, a lot of the stories, it's almost like people are just looking for that opportunity to just blast people. And I personally don't buy that. But I do think eventually this can be part of a discussion if we're working with people who are going to be responsible for understanding and developing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and organizations. They've done that. They've been through training, but I think they're to the next level of how are they going to change behavior around those components or those concepts. And that's why I think this is important.
Yeah, I agree. Let me show you another part of the assessment that I really like. And this is, so we've talked about, this is what your assessment looks like. These are what they tell you. And to go through social awareness is basically, how do you read a room? Are you able to read a room? And social regulation is, are you able to maintain the relationships that you need? But then starting on page 9 through the rest of the report is a page on each one of the factors. So, I'm just a little bit below the mean in self-awareness. Based on Chip's level of EQ in this dimension, he is moderately self-aware, meaning he may notice what he's feeling, but is not always able to explain it. So it gives you a couple of lines about your particular report. And so I think that's tremendously helpful. And then there's a whole bunch of things about what Chip can do. So there's, however many bullets there are. What I say is my best advice. So when I'm doing a debrief with someone, my best advice is to pick one. And then, I talk about waypoints. You can talk about goal planning sheets. You can talk about however you want it. But this is an opportunity then for them to say, okay, I want to write in a journal about my emotional responses to situations that were significant. And to do that, these are the steps that I've got to take. And so the best advice is to get real good at one of them, and then if you want to move to the next one, go ahead and move to the next one. But what can be especially daunting is when people look at all of these bullets and it's like, oh God, I got to do everything. No, let's focus on one or two. Let's focus on an area. If I want to improve my self-awareness, I'm going to leave the other things alone and just focus on that. And I think that's the brilliant part of the report is it's here it is, here's your way out. It's kind of like my two favorite chapters of leadership are product of the past and understanding and affirm yourself, which is the same thing. It's here's how you got where you are, here's your way out. Yeah.
Chip, I have a question. Going through that, it just reminded me of my debrief with a TTI person when I took the emotional intelligence assessment. And she went through and, I was supposed to pick one or two that I wanted to work on. And you say, wow, this is really great. And then I don't even remember what I picked. I did nothing. So do you have a tool that you use? So not only do they pick it, you help them go to the next step of actually doing something about it?
Goal planning sheet,
Goal
or
planning sheet.
yeah, I use waypoints, but that was something I created. But goal planning sheets, that is a great way to tie it into to the trusted advisor stuff.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so let's pull out a goal planning sheet. Let's walk through the steps.
Right. Okay.
What are the obstacles? How do you want to work this out?
Okay.
And
Thank you.
and that's just a great way to say, let's pick one to work on.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
And then in your next session, you could have a little bit of accountability follow-up. So let's talk about this week, and let's talk about your progress that you made in getting started with this.
That's it.
Chip, have you found that there's some habits or kind of some things that have kind of tend to surface more than others in terms of things that people want to choose as a first step to work on?
No, it's kind of all over the board. I'm really partial to writing a journal. I don't do a really good job of it, but I'm partial to it. It's usually when I take a look at like self-awareness, it's usually things that are extremely actionable and not fuzzy. There are a couple of fuzzy statements in here, like just continue to practice the realistic perspective you are developing. What the hell does that mean?
Exactly.
I mean, who could even do that? So it's much more actionable to say, identify 3 specific measurable goals for improving your self-awareness and revisit the goals monthly. That's actionable. And so it depends, usually you can see behavioral style and drivers. You can see where people settle. Somebody that it's more intellectual rather than instinctive is going to go for the writing in a journal. Does that make sense? The one thing that I sell EQ on, and people just love it. I do this thing called communication series for Haskell, and I use EQ as one of the foundational pieces because I think it's tremendously important to understand emotional intelligence when you're trying to figure out what your basic communication is. And I think the really important part about emotional intelligence is that perhaps when you're an individual contributor, it's important because you don't want to go postal and you want to be able to talk to your coworkers. But it's that I can't remember what the graph was that has job skills and personal skills on the 2 axes, which the higher you go, the more complex the job, the more EQ factors in. And so, when you go to that supervisor level, when you go to that 50-50 level of people skills versus job skills, your engagement of the people that work for you is so much better when your emotional intelligence is better. And so for companies that really spend a lot of time, like Haskell does the Gallup 12, it's big magic. They do all kinds of follow-up. They've actually got somebody who is the manager of employee engagement. This is a company of less than 2,000 people, and so they take this really seriously. Understanding that the emotional intelligence will ramp up your engagement scores is, and we've actually seen it in some of the work that we've done with emotional intelligence, comparing them to the Gallup scores, comparing them to emotionally intelligent managers. It's pretty amazing. the other thing that I did, so the assessment was created by a guy named Izzy Justice. Izzy is a fascinating guy. He lives here in Charlotte. The only time I ever met him was in Phoenix when we were going to TTI conferences, and we kept saying we got to get together when we're in Charlotte. He actually lives only 10 miles from here, and so we started having lunch together, maybe once or twice a year. Fascinating guy. He did a real deep dive on emotional intelligence for probably 10 years. And, he coaches some pretty big people, sports stars and things like that. What he became fascinated with was happiness, and how he used to say that emotional intelligence was the center of everything. He's a lot more convinced that happiness is, and he actually has an assessment called the Happiness Quotient. And TTI has a beta version. I think they brought it out in 2019. I actually did a lot of work with it. It's pretty fascinating to look at. They never popularized it, never introduced it for wider distribution, but I got a kick out of it. But just understanding emotional intelligence and its effect on others and an effect on yourself is so cool. He wrote a number of he's written, I think, 6 different books. One of them is called Healthcare EQ. Another one is called Golf EQ, which I think the introduction is written by Gary Player, and the line in Golf EQ, I don't remember much about Golf EQ except the line in it which says, in a 4.5-hour round of golf, you're actually only golfing for 15 minutes. And the rest of the time it's managing your emotions between shots. And isn't that true? But I took an excerpt from Golf EQ, and I'll be happy or excuse me, I took an excerpt from Healthcare EQ, which talks about how to cool your emotional temperature. And so in my coaching, in all of the EQ work that I do, I make that a definite part of whatever seminar or webinar I do. And like I said, I just excerpted it from Healthcare EQ. It's really cool when you understand brain function, that we don't have to be in the situation for us to remember the emotion, and that that occurs to a lot of things. That is when we're doing affirmations, we're putting ourselves in an emotional state that we have imagined, and it's not the emotional state we're currently in. So we're able to feel emotions, and if you think back to the day you got married, the day you got divorced, the day that your first child was born, any of those days, you can bring back those emotions, and cooling your emotional temperature uses that. When he talks about well, he says there are 3 states of being, and the 3 states of being are green, yellow, and red. Green is chill. Green is enjoying life, and you're fully, they used to call it, there was a book called Flow, and you were in flow. It was just, you're in great shape, you're creative, everything's happening for you. Yellow state is kind of like, well, and I get a kick out of this. He says that we spend most of our time at work in a yellow state. So a yellow state is mild annoyance. Somebody cuts you off in traffic. Somebody sends you an email that was insensitively worded. Something triggered you. And it's not enough to get flamed on, but it's enough to get you just jittery. And so in a yellow state, your respiration goes up, your breathing goes from your stomach in a green state to your chest in a yellow state. Okay, and your blood pressure goes up. All of the indicators start to go up. And then you hit a red state, and a red state is when you're out of control. A red state is when you're fully flamed on, when something horrible has happened. And in a red state, your respiration goes to your throat, so you're in a fight or flight. You're in a complete fight or flight, and your blood pressure is way up, and you start to get cold and clammy in the in your hands, especially, because what your body is doing is it's controlling the blood flow and bringing it into the core and taking it away from your extremities. And so, I got real fascinated with this. After the stroke, I really struggled with anxiety. I mean, just horrible, crushing anxiety. That's one thing they don't tell you about having a stroke, and God help you if you ever do. But it messes with your emotions really badly, and so I dealt with anxiety, and so whenever I'd go on and give a speech, all of a sudden my blood flow would go into the center and leave my hands, and my hands would be freezing by the time, it could be 80 degrees in the room, and my hands were still freezing by the end of the talk. So what he says is, first of all, and I went to a therapist for a number of years to try to handle the anxiety and to get some strategies. And I went to a therapist that sees other therapists, which is, because I'm kind of a handful. But the first thing is the breathing. Is how do you bring your breath down to your diaphragm again? And he talks about physically putting your hand on your stomach and starting to feel your breath fully. And I've heard 10, 8, and 2 breathing. I've heard 6, 4, 6 breathing. I've heard a lot of different breathing, but that refers to breathing in through your nose for a count of 6, holding it for a count of 4, and breathing out through your mouth for a count of 6. And the sheer physical act of breathing is often enough to reduce the anxiety or reduce the anger or whatever emotion, the fear. The other thing is he talks about a yellow card and a red card, and a yellow card is 5 questions that are kind of like, I call it Defcon questions. So Defcon 5 is your chill, everything's green. Defcon 3 is yellow, and Defcon 1 is red. So it's kind of like Defcon 5, buy a helmet. Defcon 3, put the helmet on. Defcon 1, hide under the sofa. If you get to Defcon 3, that's yellow state. The Defcon 3 questions are like, what's the best client interaction you've had recently? What is the best compliment you've got from a boss or a superior? And so they're really kind of, what's the best vacation you've had? So those are more the yellow card. The Defcon 3 or Defcon 1 questions, which are the red card questions, are things like, who are the most important people in your life? Who's your best friend? And so, like I said, I'll be happy to send that to you. But the important thing is when you're feeling yourself going into this horrible state. And he makes the point in the book. He says your worst enemy is not everybody else. Your worst enemy is you. So you may feel like a damn fool pulling out this red card, but the whole idea is that it takes 5 attaboys to get rid of 1 aw damn, and physiologically it takes 5 hits of dopamine to get rid of 1 hit of cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone that causes the anxiety or the fear or the stress reaction. And dopamine is the happy hormone. And so it takes 5 hits of dopamine. The reason there's 5 questions on the yellow card and the red card is because there are 5, you're looking for those 5 hits of dopamine to counteract the cortisol and to make yourself feel better. All right, so I can talk about the stuff for hours, but you know, I don't. How are we doing so far?
Good from my perspective. I've got one off the wall question that I suspect you know the answer to.
Okay.
Why does alternative nostril breathing work?
I have no idea. And I should probably research it, but you know, maybe the Navy SEALs could tell you, because I know the Navy SEALs do a lot. SWAT teams do a lot of breathing exercises, you know, to try to calm themselves down. But in my mind, it is taking your mind off of whatever the situation is and focusing on your breath, focusing on, I'm breathing in for 6, I'm breathing out, but it's the nostril and the mouth. I mean, do you have a better idea?
I don't. Neil Pinkman, who had worked with me for a couple of years before he worked with me, he was a client of ours, and I mean, he has been involved in mindfulness and this kind of stuff for a gazillion years.
Mm.
And I can remember probably back in the 90s, you know, talking with him about, you know, I'll breathe in, hold, breathe out, switch nostrils, breathe in. And knowing the physiology of the air is basically going to go into the, you know, the sinus cavities and so on. I have no idea why air going through into your left sinus cavity versus your right sinus cavity should make any difference whatsoever, other than being the equivalent of an internal parlor trick to give yourself so much to focus on, you can no longer focus on multiple things at the same time. And so you're kind of fooling yourself into a relaxation. But I'm also, very much aware that sometimes just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You know, I mean, when Neil was working Reiki on people, and when he was doing you know, different, he was a legitimate hands-on, you know, masseuse and this kind of stuff. And he was working on the feet of one particular lady, young woman. And he said, I don't mean to alarm you, but there's not an easy way for me to say this. He said, you need to get to a gynecologist as quickly as possible. And upon examination, she had all kinds of cancer going on in her uterus, that he was touching the balls of her feet and picked up the fact that she was full of cancer. So it's just because I don't understand it, I don't come from the point that if I don't understand it, it doesn't exist. There's lots of stuff that may or may not be you know, common knowledge, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I've always been fascinated kind of with the you know, the alternative nostril breathing, specifically in terms of recentering.
Mm-hmm.
So what strikes me about that, Doug, is I've heard, and you probably know this, Chip, that your olfactory nerves are connected directly to the brain. None of your other senses are. And so it could be that by going alternate, you're stimulating right and left hemispheres alternately, and that's causing a connection that might do something.
Well, it's funny because I've heard Mike, specifically, Neil used to talk about trying to get both halves of the brain to gel, and he used to use it every time he really needed to hyper focus on something. He would use alternative nostril breathing in order to try to get, so to speak, all of the brain focused on the task at hand. But I was just but don't know much. What I've just shared with you is the total amount of knowledge that I have on that as a subject.
There is a field of study. There was a book called The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton several years ago, and in it he talked about performance kinesiology. And performance kinesiology, I know a practitioner. I actually took a 3-day course on it several years ago. I went in with the BS meters waving really high, and by the end of the 3 days, I was like, oh, this is cool. And in fact, what I did with that is that I do an add-on to affirmations that is called a visual, auditory, and kinesthetic view of affirmations. I think I've done it a quarterly a long time ago, but the performance kinesiology says that usually it's an imbalance between the sides of the brain or the halves of the brain that is causing a lot of issues. And did you ever read Power versus Force?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what did they talk about? They talked about testing for beliefs, and in fact they talked about muscle testing. So muscle testing is if you believe something really strongly, you will hold your arm up and it won't bend.
Yeah, I
But if you don't,
basically hung on Rick Colster's arm during one of the power summits one day.
yeah, and then if you don't believe something, it just it goes down like crazy. And so in Power versus Force, they muscle tested for all kinds of beliefs. In fact, they muscle tested, I think, if I remember rightly, it was 1,000-point scale, and anything below 200 was not so good, and anything over 200 was good. And I think Jesus tested at like 600, and so it's, if you ever get a chance, Power versus Force is a really interesting book, but that's based on kinesiology. So what Lipton did, and what Voss Graham's wife, I can't remember Voss just passed away.
Robin?
Yeah, Robin. Yeah. Thank you. Robin is a practitioner of performance kinesiology, and if you ever want to know more about that, get in touch with her. She's involved through the TTI network. So anyway,
Fascinating.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I know Tom goes to the conference just about every year. I'm planning on going this year. Mike or Doug or Nancy, are you planning on going to the TTI conference?
Not this year.
No, I'm not going this year.
I'm thinking about it, but it would be sandwiched between my trip to Cameroon and then this big thing I do in Atlantic City every year. So I have to look at money.
Yeah.
And I've never said this before, Chip, but I'm supposed to be in Switzerland.
Wow. No, but that's a really great way to say it. I'm just looking forward to getting to Phoenix. The TTI conference is usually Robin is there, and I don't know, Voss passed away this spring, didn't he?
Yeah.
Do you know?
I had the date. I remember it was the spring, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Actually, we had dinner. The four of us had dinner at the conference once.
Oh, did you really? Yeah. They're wonderful people. Yeah, they're oh, that's right. They're wonderful people. They really are. But Robin is a practitioner, and it's fascinating stuff. So anyway, I know we got kind of far afield. Apologize for that. I suppose we're supposed to stick to the topic. Anything else? Any other questions?
Hey, Chip, you talked about the guy who started off as a division manager, ended up a COO, and his EQ changed for the better. What kind of things enable that change, and what kind are coachable and what kind just happen with position and responsibility?
Well, I'm going to answer that in a couple different ways. First way is that you have to understand the culture of the organization, and the culture of the organization is heavily people oriented. So if I were to describe the culture, it's people-oriented, performance-driven, and it's the two halves of that. So, but it's people-oriented first. And going along with Hartman, that was Hartman's big thing, is people are more important than tasks, are more important than systems, and so it's all people first. And Haskell is a people first organization. They're an ESOP, so everybody's an owner, and it's heavily weighted that way. Plus the new CEO coming in, actually they've known each other for a long time, but the new CEO, the old CEO was wound up on servant leadership. The new CEO is probably the best servant leader I've ever known without talking about it. So the culture pushes it that way. The second thing is that I've coached him for a long time, and I spent a lot of time working with coaching for performance, and coaching for performance is about humility, really. It's about not having to be the most intellectual person in the room. It's about asking questions, not telling people what to do. And so we've worked really heavily on the grow model. We've worked on how he can ask better questions. It is now so much a part of him. But that goes to my basic philosophy, which is the people first, and that comes through in all my coaching and all the work that I do. Yeah, Tom.
Have you ever heard of the name it to tame it technique?
No.
So I had a guy high D, high commanding, high resourceful, and he was reported a couple times by HR because he would, have outbursts. And so name it to tame it is really simple. It's like, okay, let's think about the times when your emotions got the better. In his case, it was anger, right? High D,
Right.
90 something D. And I said, so, okay, it's anger, but let's try to label that feeling a little more precisely. What is it for you? And he said, it's intolerance. And now what is triggering that intolerance? And I didn't test him afterwards, but it was a great coaching engagement, and I continue to use that tool. Let's put a tag on it. Let's put a name on it, and then let's rewind. When is it happening, and what's triggering that intolerance?
That's great. I like that.
Then you can see it coming, right?
I like that. Yeah.
And so let's remember next time that you blow a circuit breaker, what tripped it, right?
Yeah.
So now there's it's an extra self-awareness tool.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing that I'm really fortunate about is that I've been working with this organization for a long time, 12 years. And what I started to do several years ago is I do 360s. And I do 360s slightly differently. And Wendy, I'll be happy to do a session on 360s sometime. But I use the assessment package, I use interviews, and I use the TTI survey tool as well. And then I write a report of the findings. And so it's not your typical 360 where you do the electronic survey and everybody gets rated and all the results are turned back in. It's all filtered through me and written in a way that's respectful, that says, here's the areas of strength, the 2 or 3 areas that they're really strong at. Here's some areas for development. Well, I've been doing that. For the COO, I've done 5 of them over the years. First one was 2011. And so you start to get some history and see the traction that people, most of the group presidents I've done at least 2 or at least 3. Doug, I know, I appreciate it. I've gone to 4 o'clock. Have a wonderful day. Is that my cue to skidoo?
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chip.
Thank you, Chip. I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good rest of the
Thank you.
day.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Chip, before you hang up, would you be available to do that on December 6th on the 360? Here, while I have you on the phone,
I'll be happy to take a look. Hold on just a second. You got me for November too, right?
yeah, November 8th is the stress quotient.
Can't do December 6th.
Okay. How about December 20th?
Oh, that's, I hope to be at the cabin December 20th. No, I'll go ahead and do that. That's fine. 3 o'clock on December 20th.
Are you sure?
Sure.
And then we'll take off after that
Yeah, I hope so.
because of the holidays. And if we think that's too, if we think that's too late, we could also always push it off till the beginning of January.
Okay. All right. All right. How's Power Summit looking?
It's looking good. We've got, I think all trainers are already confirmed and hearing some good stuff about it.
Well, good. I'm looking forward to it. Good to talk to you.
Good talking to you too.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.